You will tell me exactly where the money went. Your Grace, I can explain.
Whatever you're hiding, I will find it. Mr. Vance accuses me of theft. I accuse him of stealing this family's fortune for nearly a decade.
Lies, fabrications from a desperate...
Arrest them both!
The storm had been going on for an hour before the shouting started.
Novalee came up the last stretch of the Ashford Drive on foot, her one travelling case cutting into her palm, and she heard the voices before she saw the house sharp, furious, rising over the hiss of rain on stone.
She stopped at the edge of the courtyard.
Light spilled gold from the tall windows of the estate, and through the glass she could see them, a wall of servants standing rigid in the great hall, chins lifted, eyes down, the particular stillness of people trying very hard not to be noticed. At the centre of that stillness stood two men. One was pale and shaking, his collar askew, his hands opening and closing at his sides like he didn't know what to do with them anymore. The other was not shaking at all.
He was tall, dressed in deep blue velvet that caught the chandelier light like water, and his finger was raised an inch from the trembling man's face.
"You will tell me," he said, "exactly where the money went." His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. The trembling man opened his mouth, and nothing came out.
Novala's breath caught in her throat.
She had come to Ashford Estate for one reason only: to disappear. To become no one, in a house so large that no one would think to look for her here. She had not expected to arrive in the middle of a war. The man in blue turned his head, slowly, and his gaze found her through the rain-streaked glass, a girl standing alone in the storm, in a gown too fine for a servant's entrance, looking like she'd stumbled into the wrong story entirely. For one long moment, neither of them moved. Then he looked away, back to the trembling man before him, and said the words that would follow her through every corridor of that house, whispered by every maid who saw her after.
"She's too gentle for this house."
He had no idea how wrong he was.
Because by the time autumn came, every servant behind those doors would kneel to no one. But her. The rain did not stop when the doors closed behind her. Novalee stood just inside the servants' entrance of Ashford Estate, water pooling from the hem of her borrowed cloak onto stone floors, scrubbed pale by decades of hard use, and for a moment she had made it. Whatever came next, she had made it through the gate, past the gravel court where the Duke had pointed his finger like a blade, past the terrible hush that had followed his verdict about her. Too gentle for this house. The words sat cold in her chest. Not because they wounded her, she had been called worse by people who mattered far less, but because they were, in their way, a kind of warning. He had looked at her once, from a distance, through rain-streaked glass, and already decided what she was. She intended to prove him wrong before the year was out. A woman appeared from the shadows of the corridor, keys strung at her waist, eyes sweeping over Novalee's fine but travel-ruined gown with open suspicion. "You're the new girl? From the agency?"
Yes, Novalee said, because it was easier than the truth.
"Mrs. Whitlock," the woman said, not offering a hand. "Housekeeper. You'll answer to me for everything except your soul, and some days I'll want that too." She did not smile. "Mr. Vance runs this house below stairs, and Mr. Vance does not tolerate softness. I'd advise you to find some spine before morning, or you won't last the week." Novalee inclined her head. "I intend to last considerably longer than a week." Something flickered in Mrs. Whitlock's face, not warmth, not yet, but the faintest note of interest, as if she had expected tears and gotten steel instead. "We'll see," she said, and turned down the corridor, expecting to be followed.
The house swallowed her.
Novalee followed the housekeeper through corridors that grew narrower and colder the deeper they went, until the marble beneath her feet gave way to worn flagstone, and the distant hum of chandeliers gave way to the clatter and steam of a kitchen fighting to keep pace with a household it could not afford to serve. She caught fragments of the estate as she passed a gallery of ancestors with hard Ashford eyes, a ballroom dark and silent as a held breath, a study door left ajar just enough to reveal ledgers stacked in uneven, anxious towers. She filed it all away. Old habits. She had spent years learning to read a room the way other girls read novels, and this room, this entire house, was already telling her a story it did not mean to tell. By the time they reached the servants' hall, the last of the daylight had drained out of the windows entirely, leaving only firelight and the exhausted faces of perhaps a dozen staff crowded around a table too small for them, eating in the particular silence of people who had learned that conversation could be dangerous.
"New scullery girl," Mrs. Whitlock announced, and left her there.
No one looked up. Novali stood at the threshold a moment longer than she meant to, cloak still dripping, case still clutched in one white-knuckled hand, and understood with a small, sinking clarity that she had traded one kind of danger for another quieter, perhaps, but no less real. Then a girl near her own age, hollow-eyed and thin in a way that spoke of skipped meals rather than fashion, slid over on the bench and made room without a word. Novali sat. It was, she would think much later, the first kindness Ashford Estate had offered her. It would not be the last, but that night, exhausted and frightened, and far from anything she had ever called home, she did not yet know that. She only knew that the girl beside her smelled of lye soap and burnt sugar, and that somewhere above them, in rooms she would likely never see, a man in a blue velvet coat had already decided she would not survive here.
She intended to lie to him.
The scullery, she discovered before dawn had properly broken, was less a room than a punishment. It sat below the kitchen proper, damp-walled and half-lit, stacked floor to ceiling with pots blackened by neglect and baskets of vegetables no one had bothered to sort. The girl from the bench the night before Effie, she'd introduced herself, quick and nervous as a sparrow, showed her the ropes with an apologetic wince, as if embarrassed on the house's behalf. "You'll do this till your hands bleed," Effie warned. "Cook doesn't care. Cook's afraid of Mr. Vance, same as the rest of us." Novali looked at the chaos before her, burnt pots wedged beside clean ones, spoiled produce mixed with fresh, no order to any of it, hours upon hours of wasted motion built into a system that punished everyone simply by being badly made, and felt something settle in her, quiet and familiar. She had run her late father's shipping ledgers by the time she was 14. She had organised a household of 40 servants before her uncle's greed burned that life to the ground. Chaos to Novali was not a wall.
It was a puzzle.
"Leave it to me," she said, and rolled up her sleeves. By midday, word had begun to travel quietly, the way all true things travelled in that house, mouth to ear behind cupped hands. The new scullery girl had reorganised 3 days' backlog before the bells rang for luncheon. She had sorted the root cellar by spoilage date without being asked. She had shown the youngest kitchen maid, a girl of perhaps 12 with burn scars up one forearm, a faster way to blanch greens that didn't require standing over open flame for half an hour at a stretch. Cook, a broad, weary woman named Mrs. Pruitt, who had not smiled in what the staff swore was a calendar year, stood in the scullery doorway with her hands on her hips and looked at the transformed shelves for a long moment. "Who taught you that?" she asked, suspicion warring with something that might, in a kinder house, have been hope. "No one," Novali lied, smooth as water. "I simply hate wasted work." Mrs. Pruitt grunted not quite approval, but close enough to it, and turned back to her stove without further comment. It was, Novali was beginning to understand, the highest praise this house knew how to give. The days folded into each other, each one a little easier than the last, not because the work grew lighter, but because the kitchen itself did. Novelly built order the way water finds its level, quietly, without announcement, letting results speak where words would only invite suspicion. She taught the maids to stagger their tasks so no one carried the full weight alone. She found a rhythm to the laundry rotation that cut 2 hours from Effie's day. She noticed, within the week, that the ration book cook kept did not match the deliveries coming through the back gate, a discrepancy so small most would have missed it. A few pounds of flour here, a side of mutton there, and said nothing aloud, only tucked the observation away like a coin into a pocket.
A few days later, she caught the youngest maid, Sally, 12 years old and already too thin, crying quietly behind the coal store, one arm cradled against her ribs.
"He struck me," Sally whispered when Novali knelt beside her. "For dropping a tray, Mr. Vance." Novali's hands went very still. "He does it to all of us sometimes," Sally said, wiping her face with a sleeve gone grey from washing. "Mrs. Whitlock says not to mind it. Says it's the way of a proper house." "It is not," Novelli said, quiet and certain. "The way of any house worth serving." She helped the girl to her feet, checked the arm with careful fingers bruised, not broken. Small mercy, and walked her back into the kitchen with a steadiness she did not entirely feel. That night, lying in the narrow servant's bed, she shared the room with Effie. Novelli stared at the ceiling and let herself feel, for the first time since arriving, the true shape of her anger. She had come to Ashford Estate to hide. She had not expected to find, tucked inside its cruelty, a dozen reasons to stay and fight. "The Duke thinks I'm too gentle for this house," she thought. "He has no idea that gentleness is not the same as weakness." She fell asleep, still turning the thought over, like a stone worn smooth by water, and did not yet know how soon she would be forced to test it against the man himself. She met him 3 nights later, entirely by accident, in the one place in the house she had assumed would be safe from notice. The North Library kept late hours, Effie had told her, because his lordship rarely slept before dawn, but Novelli had gone there anyway, candle in hand, drawn by the promise of books after a week that had left her starved for anything resembling her old life. She had not expected him to already be there, folded into a wing chair by the dying fire, a glass of something amber untouched at his elbow, staring into flame with the particular stillness of a man who had forgotten anyone else existed in the world.
She froze in the doorway.
He looked up. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The firelight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the exhaustion he did not trouble to hide from an empty room, and Novelli understood with a suddenness that unsettled her that this was not the cold, furious man from the courtyard. This was something else. Something quieter. Something that looked, in this unguarded hour, less like a duke and more like a man drowning very slowly and very privately, with no one left to notice. "You're the new scullery girl," he said. Not a question. "Novelli, Your Grace." She dropped a curtsy, too late, too stiff. "I didn't know the library was." "It isn't forbidden." His voice was low, rough at the edges, as if unused that day to speaking at all. Merely unvisited. By anyone with sense. A pause. "You may take a book, if that's what you came for." She hesitated at the threshold, caught between instinct and curiosity, as it so often did with her, one. "I came for quiet," she admitted. "There's precious little of it, below the stairs." Something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth, gone before it fully arrived. "There's precious little of it anywhere in this house," he said. "I find that out nightly." She should have left then. Every instinct honed by a year of hiding told her to curtsy again and vanish back into the dark corridor before he asked her name a second time, before he looked at her, the way he was looking at her now, not with suspicion, not with the cold dismissal of the courtyard, but with something startled and searching, as if she were a puzzle he hadn't expected to find in his own house. Instead, she stayed. "You said I was too gentle for this house," she said, before she could stop herself. The first night, in the courtyard.
His gaze sharpened. "You heard that."
"The whole staff heard it, Your Grace. I imagine the horses heard it." For a moment, she thought she had overstepped badly enough to end her time at Ashford before it had properly begun, and then, astonishingly, he laughed. Just once, short and low, as if the sound surprised him as much as it did her. "Then I imagine," he said, "the whole staff is waiting to see if I'm right." "They'll wait a long time," Novalie said, and left before he could answer, her heart hammering in a way that had nothing to do with fear of being caught. She did not return to the library the next night, or the one after. She told herself it was prudence that a scullery maid had no business lingering in candlelit rooms with a duke who looked at her too long, who spoke to her like she was a person rather than a uniform, but the truth, quieter and more dangerous, was that she had felt something in that room she had not expected to feel again in her life. Recognition. The particular ache of meeting someone else who had learned to carry grief without letting it show. "It changes nothing," she told herself, scrubbing pots until her knuckles ached. "He is a duke. I am a girl hiding from her own name. There is no story here worth telling." But she thought of him anyway at dawn, elbow deep in dishwater, at dusk, folding linens with hands that had gone raw from lye, and hated herself a little for it, and could not seem to stop. A few nights later, fate or something that felt suspiciously like it put them in the same corridor again. This time by daylight, both of them too startled to retreat before recognition passed between them. "Novalie." He said her name like he'd been holding on to it. "You've been avoiding the library." "I've been working, Your Grace." Which was true, and also not the whole truth, and they both seemed to know it. He studied her a moment too long. "Mrs. Pruitt tells me the kitchen has not run this smoothly in 3 years," he said. She did not credit herself for it. Novalie's pulse quickened, not fear this time, but something far more complicated. "I only tidied what was already there. You reorganized a household in a week that Vance has failed to properly manage in a decade." His eyes did not leave her face. "That is not tidying. That is competence I did not expect to find scrubbing my pots." She did not know what to say to that, did not trust herself to say anything at all, with him looking at her like she was something worth reconsidering, and so she curtsied, murmured an excuse about the linens, and walked away faster than dignity strictly allowed. Behind her, she did not see the way he watched her go. She only felt, all the way down the corridor, the weight of being truly seen for the first time since her father died, and understood, with a shiver that was not entirely dread, that it had cracked something open in her she was not ready to examine. Mr. Vance noticed everything eventually. That was the trouble with a house run on fear. Its architect made a study of every shift in its foundations, and by the second week, the foundations had shifted considerably. He found Novalie in the scullery, arms deep in a basin of grease-slicked water, and stood in the doorway long enough that the temperature of the room seemed to drop before he spoke a single word. "You've made yourself indispensable rather quickly," he said. Soft. Which she was already learning was worse than shouting.
"I only do the work assigned to me, sir."
"You do considerably more than that." His pale eyes moved over the transformed shelves, the labelled jars, the order she had built from wreckage with nothing but patience and stubbornness. "The staff speaks your name like a charm. Cook defers to you. Even Mrs. Whitlock has stopped correcting your posture." A thin smile. "That is not the behaviour of a scullery maid." That is the behaviour of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Novalie kept her hands steady in the water, though her heart had begun to hammer. I was a governess once, sir. Before circumstances changed. Were you? He did not sound convinced, and did not trouble to hide it. How fortunate for us then that circumstances brought you here. He let the silence stretch, thin and cutting as wire. I would advise you, Novalie, not to grow too comfortable in your usefulness. Houses like this one do not reward girls who rise too quickly. They remember them. He left without waiting for a reply, and Novalie stood very still in the cooling water, understanding with sudden, sick clarity that exactly the wrong person had noticed her, and that noticing in Mr. Vance's world was rarely followed by anything kind. The retaliation began quietly, the way all cruelty in that house began. The next morning the supply room stood locked when Effie went to fetch the day's flour locked. Though it had never once been locked in living memory, the key mysteriously absent from its hook. "Mr. Vance has it," the footman told them, not meeting their eyes. "Says stores are being watched more carefully. On account of waste." There was no waste. There was only Novalie's name, spoken too often in rooms Vance did not control, and a message being sent the only way he knew how to send it. That evening, rations at the servants' table came thinner than they had in a week, the meat stretched with more broth than substance, the bread cut smaller, portions doled out with a precision that felt less like economy and more like punishment. Sally, the youngest, looked at her half-empty bowl with the particular resignation of a child who had learned not to ask why.
Novala's jaw tightened. She said nothing. Not yet.
A day later, she overheard two footmen speaking low near the boot-room voices, dropping the moment they noticed her, but not fast enough to hide the shape of the warning already passed between them. "Vance says anyone caught talking to her loses their position," one muttered. "Said it plainly this morning. No exceptions." Novalie walked past without breaking stride, spine straight, expression carefully smooth but inside. Something cold and clear was settling into place, sharp as the edge of a blade being drawn for the first time. He is afraid of me, she realized, and the thought startled her with how little fear it carried in return. A man like that does not punish what he considers harmless. By the following week, the house had grown careful around her in a new and different way, not the careless kindness of Effie sliding over on a bench, but the wary distance of people watching to see who would be punished next for standing too close. Effie herself came to her one evening, red-eyed, twisting her apron in both hands. "I can't be seen talking to you so much," she whispered, miserable. "Mrs. Whitlock warned me plainly. Said Vance has eyes on you special. Said if I don't want trouble, I'd best keep my distance." "I understand," Novalie said, and meant it, though the words cost her more than she let on. "You've a family depending on your wages, Effie. I won't ask you to risk that for my sake." Effie's face crumpled with something like shame. It isn't right. What he's doing. Locking the stores. Cutting the food. All because you made things better.
"No," Novalie agreed, quietly. "It isn't right at all."
But she understood too, in a way that ached, exactly what Vance was doing, isolating her the way a wolf cuts a lamb from the flock before it strikes, teaching the staff that kindness toward her carried a cost too steep to pay. It was a strategy she recognized, because she had watched her own uncle wield the very same weapon, back when her world still had a shape she recognized. It will not work, she promised herself, alone in the dark of the room she now often occupied without company. I did not survive him only to be broken by a man exactly like him. She thought, unbidden, of candlelight and low laughter and a duke who had looked at her like she mattered. She wondered if he had any notion at all of what was happening beneath his own roof, and something in her, stubborn and unwilling to be silenced, decided it was time he did. She found her opportunity 3 nights later, when a summons came for her to deliver a late supper tray to the study an errand Vance himself had assigned. She suspected, hoping to catch her in some misstep worth reporting. Instead, she found Dominic alone at his desk, ledgers spread before him in the same anxious towers she'd glimpsed on her first night, his expression drawn tight with a tension that had nothing to do with her arrival. "Leave it there," he said, without looking up, and then noticing, finally, who had brought it softened, just slightly. "No, Valet. Your Grace." She set the tray down with careful hands and hesitated at the edge of leaving, weighing consequence against conscience. Conscience won, as it so often did with her. "May I speak plainly?" He looked up properly then, something wary and curious crossing his face in equal measure. "You generally do." "Go on." "The staff is afraid," she said. "More than usual. Rations have been cut. The supply room was locked without cause. People warned against ordinary kindness toward one another." She held his gaze, steady despite the risk. "I don't believe that is your doing, Your Grace. But I believe you should know whose it is." Something shifted behind his eyes, not disbelief, which she had half expected, but a slow, grim understanding, as if she had confirmed a suspicion he had been too exhausted to chase down himself.
"Vance," he said, "not a question."
"I've said nothing you didn't already suspect." He studied her for a long moment, and in that silence, Novaly felt the full weight of what she'd just done placed herself, deliberately, between a dangerous man and the master he answered to, with nothing but the truth as her shield. "You take considerable risks," he said finally, "for a scullery maid." "I take considerable risks," she corrected quietly, "for people who cannot afford to take them themselves." Something in his expression cracked open then, not fully, not enough for either of them to name it, but enough that she saw, for one unguarded instant, exactly how much it meant to him that someone in his house still cared what happened to the people in it. "Thank you," he said low. "I'll see it addressed." She curtsied and left before either of them could say anything more dangerous than what had already passed between them, but she carried the look on his face with her all the way back down to the kitchens, warm and unsettling in equal measure, like a coal held too long in an open palm. Whatever Dominic said to Vance, he said it privately, and it did not go well for either of them. The next day, the supply room stood unlocked again, but Vance's eyes, when they found Novaly across the kitchen, carried a new and colder fury. The particular rage of a man who has been checked in front of no one and resents it all the more for the privacy of his humiliation. "You went to him," he said, cornering her near the pantry, voice pitched too low for anyone else to hear. "You went above me." "I answered a question honestly," Novaly said, refusing to retreat a single step, though her pulse hammered hard enough to feel in her throat. "That is not the same as scheming, sir." "Isn't it?" His smile held no warmth at all. "You are a clever girl, Novaly. Cleverer, I think, than a scullery maid has any right to be. I find myself wondering where such cleverness was learned." His gaze sharpened, searching, as if trying to peel back the plain wool of her dress to whatever lay beneath it. "I find myself wondering, too, what a girl with your particular talents is truly doing in my kitchen." The words landed like a struck match near dry kindling. She kept her face perfectly still, years of practiced composure the only thing standing between her and disaster. "Earning honest wages, sir. Nothing more remarkable than that. We shall see." He stepped back finally, and the space he left behind felt no safer than his presence had. "I have a very long memory, Novaly, and a very great patience for watching things unravel in their own time. He left her standing alone among the flour sacks, heart hammering, understanding with sudden and total clarity that she had made an enemy far more dangerous than she had first believed, a man who did not simply wish to punish her, but suspected, correctly, that she was not at all what she claimed to be. She did not sleep well that night, turning Vance's words over until they wore grooves into her thoughts, where such cleverness was learned. It was too close to the truth for comfort, too close to the uncle who had hunted her out of her own home, too close to the name she had buried the moment she crossed onto Ashford land. If he suspects, he will look, she thought, staring into the dark. And if he looks, he may find far more than a runaway governess. But beneath the fear sat something else, quieter and more stubborn, the same instinct that had made her memorize her father's ledgers as a girl, that had made her notice the mismatch between deliveries and rations without being asked to look. Vance was not merely cruel. He was careful, in the specific way of a man protecting something worth far more than his own bad temper. She thought of the ledgers she'd glimpsed her first night, stacked anxiously and unevenly in a study door left ajar. She thought of rations cut not for economy, but for control. She thought of a duke exhausted by numbers he did not fully understand, and a household bleeding money it should not have been bleeding. What if his cruelty isn't only cruelty, she wondered, heart, quickening with the shape of a suspicion she could not yet prove. What if it's covered? The thought frightened her more than anything Vance had said outright, because if she was right, then the danger in this house ran far deeper than one bitter man's temper. And if she was right, she was the only person positioned to prove it.
A week later, opportunity and danger arrived together, wrapped in the same autumn storm.
The thunder had been building since dusk, rolling low over the hills beyond Ashford's walls, and by the time the last candles below stairs were doused, rain hammered the windows hard enough to swallow every ordinary sound the housemaid's settling into sleep. It was, Novelli realized, lying awake and listening to Effie's steady breathing beside her, precisely the kind of night no one would notice a single set of footsteps in the wrong corridor.
She rose before she let herself think better of it.
The archive room sat at the end of the east wing, a narrow door she had passed a dozen times on ordinary errands, always locked, always unremarkable until tonight, when it had become the only place in the house that might hold the truth she was chasing. Her hands shook as she knelt before the lock, not from cold, but from the particular fear of a girl who had already lost everything once to men who kept secrets behind locked doors. She had learned to pick locks the hard way, in the desperate months after her father's death, when survival had demanded skills no gently raised young woman was meant to possess. Her fingers remembered the motion even now, patient, precise, listening for the give beneath the pins, rather than forcing what would not yield. The lock surrendered with a small, final click, swallowed instantly by a crack of thunder overhead. She slipped inside and shut the door softly behind her. The archive room, by candlelight, looked at first like nothing more than dust and forgotten paper shelves of estate records stretching back generations, the ordinary detritus of a great house's long memory. But Novelli had not survived a year on the run by trusting first impressions, and she moved through the shelves with the same methodical patience she'd once brought to her father's counting house, searching for the newer ledgers among the old. She found them tucked behind a false panel of ordinary account books, 3 volumes bound in plain leather, unremarkable except for the care someone had taken to hide them. Her pulse quickened as she opened the first. The handwriting was Vance's. She recognized it from the ration books he kept below. Stares, but the numbers inside told a story far larger than cut rations and locked pantries. Shipments logged as delivered that never appeared in the estate stores. Tenant rents are recorded twice, once in the official book and once, at a lower figure here. Payments to suppliers who did not exist anywhere else in Ashford's records, dozens of them, small enough individually to escape notice, vast enough together to explain everything. She turned page after page by guttering candlelight, thunder shaking the windows overhead, and watched a fortune bleed slowly out of the Ashford Estate, one falsified entry at a time, enough, by her hurried calculations, to account for the crumbling roofs she'd noticed in the East Wing, the rationed stores, the desperate economy of a household that should, by any honest accounting, have wanted for nothing. Millions, she thought, numb with the scale of it. He has been draining this house for years. And then, turning a final page, her breath caught entirely. A separate list, tucked at the back of the third volume, named not suppliers or tenants, but families' noble names she half recognized from her old life, each followed by a sum, a date, and a single chilling word inked beside every entry.
Settled.
She did not yet understand what it meant. But she understood, with the cold certainty of a woman who had seen her own family's fortune stolen by men exactly like this, that she had found something far larger than one butler's greed, something that reached well beyond the walls of Ashford Estate, into houses and lives she could not yet name. Thunder cracked directly overhead, so loud the candle guttered near to darkness, and beneath it, faint but unmistakable, she heard the sound of a door opening somewhere down the corridor.
Footsteps.
Novalie froze, ledger clutched to her chest, heart slamming so hard she was certain it could be heard over the storm itself. The footsteps drew closer, unhurried, deliberate, the particular pace of someone who already suspected exactly what they might find. She realized with a chill that had nothing to do with the storm, perhaps 30 seconds to decide what kind of woman she truly was. The old Novalie, the one who had learned, at terrible cost, that survival meant invisibility, would have doused the candle, replaced the ledgers, and prayed the footsteps passed by unaware. But she had not come this far, endured this much, unlearned so carefully the habit of silence, only to hide again now. She blew out the candle anyway, some instincts ran too deep to abandon entirely, and pressed herself into the shadow of the tallest shelf, ledger still clutched tight against her chest, and waited to learn whether the next 30 seconds would end her time at Ashford Estate, or simply mark the true beginning of it.
The footsteps stopped directly outside the door.
The door did not open. Novalie stood frozen in the dark of the archive room, ledger pressed so tightly to her chest she could feel her own heartbeat against the leather binding, and listened as the footsteps outside paused, held, and then, after the longest 10 seconds of her life, moved on down the corridor and faded into the storm's steady rhythm. She did not move for a long time after that. When she finally trusted her legs to carry her, she returned the false panel to its place, took the ledgers back exactly as she'd found them, and slipped out into the rain-lashed night with the truth burning a hole in her memory, even though her hands, wisely, carried nothing out with her at all. She had learned that lesson once already, from her uncle's men tearing apart her father's study. Evidence left unguarded was evidence that could vanish. She would need copies. She would need time. And now, she understood with a chill that settled deep into her bones, she would need to be very, very careful, because someone else had been walking that corridor in the dead of a storm, and instinct told her it had not been an accident. The next morning, exhaustion sat heavy behind her eyes, but she moved through her scullery work with the same steady calm she always did, giving nothing away. Whatever came next, she would not hand Vance the satisfaction of watching her crack. She had no idea, yet, how quickly the next would arrive, or how close to home the danger would strike. The Dowager Ashford took her tea at 4 o'clock precisely, a ritual so fixed in the house's rhythm that even the youngest scullery maid could set a clock by it. Dominic's grandmother was sharp-tongued and formidable, the only member of the family who still frightened Vance even slightly, and it was perhaps for that reason, Novalie would think later, piecing together the wreckage, that she had been chosen as the instrument of the trap. The scream, when it came, tore through the house like something physical. Novalie reached the drawing room among the first, heart hammering, to find the old woman doubled over in her chair, face grey, hand pressed to her chest, a maid sobbing uselessly beside the overturned tea service. Dominic arrived seconds later, and the sight of his grandmother struggling to breathe stripped every trace of composure from his face in an instant Novalie would not soon forget.
"Get the physician," he barked, already at his grandmother's side. "Now."
The dowager survived. Barely. The physician, summoned at a dead run through the storm-wet grounds, worked through the night and pronounced by dawn that she would live, though the poison, whatever it had been, had come dangerously close to stopping her heart entirely. By breakfast, Vance had already decided who would answer for it. The tea came from the kitchen, he announced to the assembled staff, his voice carrying the particular satisfaction of a man who had been waiting for precisely this opportunity. His eyes found Novalie across the room with the precision of a man aiming a weapon. Prepared, I am told, under the direct supervision of the new scullery maid.
The room went utterly silent.
That is a lie, Novalie said, and was proud later of how steady her voice remained. I never touched the dowager's tray. Ask anyone in that kitchen. I have asked, Vance said smoothly. Several reported you were near the tray that morning. Alone with it, in fact, for some minutes. He let the accusations settle like frost over the room. A poisoning, in a house you entered less than a month ago, under circumstances no one here has ever fully verified. Novalie felt the trap close around her with sickening precision, every innocent moment of her weeks at Ashford now recast as evidence. Every act of competence now proof of some deeper scheme. She looked for an ally in the room and found only frightened faces, staff too afraid of Vance's retribution to speak in her defence. Then Effie stepped forward, hands shaking, voice barely above a whisper. I was with her the whole morning, sir. She never went near the dowager's tray. Not once. She's lying to protect her, Vance snapped. I'm not. Effie's chin lifted, terror plain on her face, but her voice held steady. I swear it on my mother's grave. It was, Novalie understood in that moment. An act of tremendous courage, a frightened girl risking everything to defend herself against a man who had already demonstrated, repeatedly, exactly what he did to people who crossed him. She would not forget it. Not ever. Dominic's gaze moved between them, Vance, rigid with certainty Novalie, steady despite the accusation. Effie, trembling but unmoved, and something in his expression hardened into a decision. No one is dismissed, he said, until I have the truth of this myself. His eyes found Novalis, and in them she read not doubt, but something far more dangerous to Vance's carefully constructed trap faith. Mr. Vance, you will produce your witnesses. All of them. Today. Vance's jaw tightened, the first crack Novalie had seen in his composure since her arrival. As you wish, Your Grace. But as the staff dispersed, murmuring, Novalie caught the look he sent her, not defeat, but recalculation, the expression of a man whose trap had failed and was already building a better one. The witnesses, when Dominic questioned them privately that afternoon, fell apart within minutes. Novalie was not present for it, but Mrs. Whitlock, grim-faced, oddly gentler than usual, told her that evening how two footmen, pressed hard enough by the Duke's quiet, relentless questions, had finally admitted that Mr. Vance himself had instructed them what to say, weeks before the poisoning ever occurred. Weeks before. The realization sat like ice in Novalie's stomach. Vance had not improvised this accusation. He had prepared it in advance, built a case against her, before she'd ever given him true cause, which meant the poisoning itself had never been about the dowager at all. It had been about her. About removing a threat before it could fully bloom. He wanted you gone before you found something, Mrs. Whitlock said quietly, setting a cup of proper tea untouched by scandal in front of Novalie in the empty kitchen that night. I don't know what. I don't want to know for my own sake. But I've served this house for 30 years, and I've never seen a man work so hard to bury one scullery maid. Novalie wrapped her hands around the warm cup, steadying herself. Then he already suspects I know something. Do you? Mrs. Whitlock's eyes, sharp despite her exhaustion, held Novalie's without flinching. Novalie hesitated for only a moment. She had spent a month learning which people in this house could be trusted, and Mrs. Whitlock stern, exacting, but never once cruel had earned a place on that short list. I found ledgers, Novalie said softly. Hidden ones. Money has been leaving this estate for years, Mrs. Whitlock, and it is not going where the household books claim. The housekeeper's face went very still. How much? Millions, Novalie whispered. And a list of names. Other families. I don't yet understand what it means, but I intend to. Mrs. Whitlock was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had dropped lower still. Then you'd best understand it quickly, girl. Because a man who poisons a duchess to protect a secret will not hesitate over a scullery maid.
The next several days passed in a strange, watchful truce.
Vance, humiliated by the failure of his accusation, retreated into a colder, more careful cruelty, no more open attacks, only the quiet, constant pressure of a man reorganizing his strategy. Novalie felt his eyes on her in every corridor, every mealtime, every moment she thought herself unobserved. But something had shifted below stairs too, in ways Vance had not anticipated. Effie's public defence of her had cracked something open among the staff, a realisation, spreading quietly from kitchen to laundry to stable, that Vance's power depended entirely on their fear, once questioned even slightly, lost some of its grip. A few nights later, Novalie gathered the staff she trusted most in the empty scullery after the house had gone dark. Effie, Sally, Mrs. Pruitt, 2 footmen who had quietly apologised for their false testimony, and eventually, even Mrs. Whitlock herself, standing at the edge of the circle with her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. I won't pretend there's no danger in what I'm about to ask, Novalie said, voice low, steady, carrying the particular authority she had spent a lifetime learning not to hide. Mr. Vance has been stealing from this house for years. I believe he is capable of far worse than locked pantries and false accusations, and I believe the only way to stop him is together. Not one of us alone. What do you need? Mrs. Pruitt asked, arms folded, jaw set in a way Novalie hadn't seen from her before, not fear, but something closer to resolve. Eyes, Novalie said. Ears. If any of you notice him meeting with strangers, moving papers, sending letters, I need to know. And I need every one of us to protect each other the way no one has protected us before. If he punishes one, he punishes all of us. If he threatens one, we stand for all of us. The silence that followed was not the fearful silence Novalie had grown accustomed to in this house. It was the silence of people weighing a choice, and one by one, beginning with Effie and ending, astonishingly, with Mrs. Whitlock herself, they nodded. Ashford has never had a below stairs that stood together, Mrs. Whitlock said quietly. Perhaps it's time it learned how. It was, Novalie would think later, the true turning point of everything that followed, not the ledgers, not the Duke's growing regard for her, but this. A house full of frightened people choosing, together, to stop being frightened. Word of the pact never reached Vance directly, but he felt its effects almost immediately. Doors that no longer opened to his threats. Staff who answered his questions with careful, coordinated blankness. A household that had somehow, overnight, learned to close ranks against him.
His fury, when it came, arrived sideways, the way it always did.
The following week, he summoned Novalie to the study under the pretense of kitchen accounts, and the moment the door shut behind her, his mask of composure slipped entirely. "You think you've built yourself an army," he said, voice tight with barely restrained rage. "A pack of maids and footmen playing at loyalty. It will not save you." "I don't require saving," Novalie said, holding his gaze though her pulse hammered. "I require the truth to reach the one man in this house with the power to act on it." Something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "You know nothing of power, girl. I have spent 15 years building what I have here. I will not watch a scullery maid unravel it because she cannot learn to keep her place." "Then perhaps," Novalie said quietly, "you built it on a foundation that was never yours to keep." His hand shot out and gripped her wrist, hard enough to bruise, his composure cracking fully for the first time since she'd arrived. "Whatever you think you found," he hissed, "you will regret ever looking."
The door opened before he could say more.
Dominic stood on the threshold, and the fury that crossed his face at the sight of Vance's hand on Novalie's wrist was colder and more absolute than anything she had yet seen from him. "Remove your hand," Dominic said, "before I remove it for you." Vance released her instantly, stepping back, composure sliding back into place like a mask hastily reassembled. "A misunderstanding, Your Grace." "Nothing more." "See that it remains one," Dominic said, "or you will not enjoy discovering what happens when it doesn't." His eyes moved to Novalie, softening with a concern he did not trouble to hide even in front of Vance. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said, though her wrist throbbed where Vance's fingers had dug in. "Only relieved you arrived when you did." Vance excused himself with stiff, furious dignity, and the moment the door closed behind him, Dominic's hand came up not touching her, but close, hovering with a tenderness that made her breath catch. "I want the truth, Novalie," he said quietly. "All of it. Whatever you've been carrying since that night in the archive room, I felt it. That night I passed the corridor and found the door unlocked that should have been locked. I said nothing because I did not yet trust myself to know what I had found. I trust it now." Her heart pounded. He had been the footsteps. He had known, or suspected, all along. "Not here," she whispered. "Not where he might hear."
"Tonight, then," he said. "The library. I'll wait as long as it takes."
She came to him that night with the ledger pages she had finally managed to copy in secret, hands trembling slightly as she laid them across his desk, and watched his face change as he read disbelief giving way to fury, fury giving way to a grief so plain it nearly undid her resolve to stay composed. "Millions," he said hoarsely, echoing her own realization from weeks before. "From my own house. My own name is attached to debts that were never real." He looked up at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. "How long have you known?" "Weeks," she admitted. "I wanted certainty before I brought you half a truth." "And the list," he said, tapping the page of names and settlements. "Other families. Do you know what it means?" "Not fully," Novalie said. "But I intend to find out." He studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes that went beyond gratitude, beyond the strange, careful fascination that had been building between them since that first candlelit night. "Who are you, Novalie?" he asked, quiet and searching. A scullery maid does not read a ledger like an accountant, does not move through danger like someone who has faced it before. She hesitated at the edge of a truth she had guarded fiercely for a year, and then, looking at his face, open and worried and utterly without judgment, found she no longer wanted to guard it from him.
"My father was a merchant," she said softly. "Shipping fleets, mostly, along the eastern coast."
He taught me his ledgers before he taught me to dance. When he died, my uncle tried to force me into a marriage that would have signed away everything my father built straight into his hands. I refused. I ran. Her voice steadied, though the memory still ached. I have been running since. Ashford Estate was meant to be a place to disappear. And instead, Dominic said quietly, you found a war worth fighting. It appears, she said, the faintest smile breaking through despite everything, I am rather bad at disappearing. He reached for her hand then carefully, giving her every chance to pull away, and when she didn't, his fingers closed gently around hers. I am glad of it, he said low. Whatever else this house has cost me, I would not trade discovering you within it. The moments stretched between them, warm and dangerous and entirely unlike anything Novalee had allowed herself to feel in a year of careful hiding, and for once, she did not pull away from it. The following morning, the fragile peace was shattered entirely. A carriage arrived at Ashford's front gates before the household had properly woken plain and unremarkable, save for the 2 uniformed constables who climbed down from it alongside a man Novalee recognized instantly, and whose sight sent ice straight through every vein in her body.
Her uncle.
Older than she remembered, harder around the eyes, dressed in the same expensive coat he'd worn the night she fled her own home rather than sign her inheritance into his keeping, and standing now at Ashford's gates with the local magistrate's authority behind him, demanding entry. I am here, she heard him announce to the footman at the door, his voice carrying easily across the frosted courtyard, to reclaim my ward. A runaway gentleman, hiding beneath a false name in this household and the rightful heir, through my guardianship, to a fortune she has no legal claim to manage alone. Novalee, watching from an upstairs window with her heart hammering violently against her ribs, felt the ground shift beneath her entire careful world.
He had found her.
She turned to flee back into the servants' passages, some old instinct screaming at her to run before she could be seen, and collided directly with Dominic, who had come looking for her the moment word of the carriage reached him. Novalee. His hands caught her shoulders, steadying her, his eyes searching her face with an urgency that cut through her panic. Who is that man? My uncle, she said, voice shaking despite every effort to hold it steady. He wants the inheritance my father left me. He'll say anything to get it that I'm a runaway, unstable, incapable of managing my own affairs. He has done it before, to servants and officials alike. He is very good at being believed. Dominic's jaw tightened, something fierce and protective hardening across his features. He will have to be considerably more convincing than that to take you from this house. Dominic. Her voice broke on his name, the first time she had ever used it without title, without careful distance. If he has the magistrate's ear, if he has papers. Then we will need better papers, Dominic said, and better witnesses. Novalee, look at me. She did, and found in his eyes not doubt but a fierce, unwavering certainty. You are not alone in this house. Not anymore. Whatever he claims, whatever he brings, you will face it with every person under this roof standing behind you. Below, her uncle's voice rose again, impatient, demanding entry in Novalee. Gathering every ounce of the courage she had spent a year rebuilding, straightened her spine and walked toward the stairs to face him. The confrontation in the entrance hall was, in its way, more frightening than anything Vance had yet attempted, because her uncle did not rely on cruelty alone. He relied on the particular practiced charm of a man accustomed to being believed by everyone who mattered. Novalee. His smile did not reach his eyes as she descended the stairs. You look well, for a girl who ran from her own family in the dead of night. We've been so terribly worried. You were worried about the shipping fortune you couldn't touch without my signature, Novaly said, voice steadier than she felt. Let us not pretend otherwise in front of witnesses, uncle. His smile thinned. The girl is unwell, he said, turning to the magistrate with practiced concern. Delusions, grief since her father's death, it's why her guardianship fell to me in the first place. I only wish to bring her home, to the care she desperately requires. She is not going anywhere, Dominic said, stepping forward, without evidence considerably stronger than your words, sir.
Her uncle's gaze slid over Dominic with a cool assessment. And you are?
The Duke of Ashford, Dominic said, in whose house you currently stand uninvited, attempting to remove a member of my staff on the strength of accusations you have not troubled to prove. Something calculating crossed her uncle's face. The recognition of a man realizing his prey had found protection he had not anticipated. Your Grace, he said, tone shifting instantly toward deference, I have no wish to cause difficulty. Only to see my niece return to proper care, and the family's affairs properly settled, as the law requires. Then produce your documentation, Dominic said, and I will have my own solicitor review it thoroughly. Until such time, she remains under my protection, and you remain a guest whose welcome grows thinner by the moment. Her uncle's eyes flicked to Novaly, calculating, and something in his expression, the particular patience of a predator willing to wait, made her blood run cold. Of course, Your Grace, he said smoothly. I would not dream of rushing such a delicate matter. I shall return with full documentation. Soon. His gaze lingered on Novaly a moment longer. Very soon, my dear. He left with the magistrate and constables in tow, the carriage rattling back down the frost-hardened drive, but the danger, Novaly understood with a sick certainty, had not left with him. It had only retreated to gather strength. That night, in the quiet of the library, Novaly finally allowed the fear she had held at bay all day to surface, and Dominic, watching her hands tremble around a cup of tea she could not quite bring herself to drink, moved to sit beside her rather than across from her for the first time. He will come back, she said softly. With papers. Real ones, or forged ones, convincing enough to pass. He has enough money to buy either. Then we will be ready, Dominic said, with proof of our own. He hesitated, then added, quieter, Novaly, the ledgers you found the list of names, the settlements. Is it possible your uncle's name appears among them? The thought struck her like a physical blow. She had been so consumed by Vance's schemes, by her own fear of her uncle's arrival, that she had not considered the two threats might share a single tangled root. I don't know, she admitted. But if he does... Then Vance and your uncle are not separate dangers, Dominic finished grimly. They are the same conspiracy, wearing two different faces. The realization settled between them, heavy and clarifying. Whatever came next, whatever trap her uncle and Vance were building together, it would not be two separate battles. It would be one, and it would come for her from every direction at once. I am frightened, Novaly admitted, the words costing her more than she expected them to. I have spent a year learning not to say that aloud. Dominic's hand found hers, gentle and certain. Then let it be the last year you carry that fear alone, he said. Whatever comes, Novaly, you will not face it without me beside you. That much I can promise you absolutely. She looked at him, this man she had thought cold and unreachable on her first terrified night at Ashford, now offering her the one thing she had not realized she still hoped for, and let herself, just for a moment, believe him. The autumn gala had been planned for months before any of this began, a tradition of the Ashford name, meant to reassure the county that the estate's fortunes remained secure despite years of quiet rumour. Dominic had considered cancelling it entirely, given everything unfolding beneath his own roof, but Novaly had convinced him otherwise. If Vance and my uncle mean to strike, she reasoned, let them choose their moment, believing they hold every advantage. A gala, full of witnesses, full of the county's most influential families, it is the worst possible place for them to attempt anything. Or, she added, steel entering her voice, it is exactly the stage we need to expose them both in front of everyone who matters. Dominic had studied her for a long moment, something like awe mixing with worry in his expression. You intend to use their own trap against them. I intend, Novaly said, to make certain that whatever they plan to do to me in that ballroom, the truth arrives first. The days leading to the gala passed in careful, secret preparation. Mrs. Whitlock helped smuggle copies of the ledgers to a solicitor in the nearest town, a man Dominic trusted absolutely, and Vance had no reach over. Effie and the footman kept watch on Vance's movements, reporting each meeting, each hushed letter sent and received. And Novaly, in stolen hours between her duties, compiled everything into a single damning account: dates, sums, names, the full architecture of a conspiracy that had bled Ashford Estate dry for years. The night before the gala, she stood in the library with Dominic, the finished evidence spread between them, and felt something settle in her chest that was not quite peaceful, but was close enough to it. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said quietly, I want you to know that coming here to this house, into this danger, was still the best decision I have made since my father died. Dominic's hand found her face, gentle and reverent, tilting it up toward his own. And I want you to know, he said low, that whatever title you carry when this is over, maid, heiress, or something else entirely, it will change nothing about how I have come to feel about you.
For one suspended, breathless moment, neither of them moved.
Then he kissed her soft, certain, a question and an answer at once, and Novaly, for the first time in a year of running, let herself stop. The ballroom, on the night of the gala, blazed with the particular gold light of a house determined to prove its own splendour to a county full of watching eyes. Chandeliers threw their glow across silk and velvet. Laughter and music filled every corner, and beneath it all, Novaly moved through the crowd in a borrowed gown, heart hammering with attention none of the assembled guests could see. She found Vance near the refreshment tables, composed and immaculate, and beside him, unmistakably, her uncle dressed for the county's finest company, smiling as though he belonged there, as though the past weeks had never happened.
The trap, when it came, arrived with theatrical precision.
Vance raised his voice at precisely the moment the music paused, cutting through the gathered crowd with practiced authority. Your Grace, he called, loud enough to draw every eye in the ballroom, forgive the interruption, but a matter of grave urgency cannot wait. He gestured toward Novaly with cold satisfaction. This woman, employed in your household under false pretenses, has this evening been found in possession of stolen estate jewels hidden among her belongings. A gasp rippled through the crowd. 2 footmen, Vance's men, Novaly realized with a chill, not her allies, stepped forward bearing a small chest, open to reveal glittering pieces she had never once touched. And more than theft, her uncle added smoothly, stepping into the light beside Vance with practiced concern. This woman is my ward, fled from lawful guardianship under a false name, wanted for questioning regarding the disappearance of considerable family funds. I have documentation, Your Grace, prepared for precisely this moment. The crowd's murmur swelled into something dangerous, hundreds of eyes turning toward Novaly with the particular hunger of society watching a scandal unfold in real time. She felt the old instinct rise in her, the urge to flee, to vanish, to become invisible before the accusation could fully close around her.
She did not move.
Then let us examine your documentation, Novaly said instead, voice ringing clear and steady across the sudden hush of the ballroom, alongside evidence of my own. She stepped forward into the centre of the gathered crowd, and from beneath her shawl produced the bound copies of the ledgers she had spent weeks compiling the true master accounts, painstakingly gathered and verified, carried close to her heart through every danger of the past month. "Mr. Vance accuses me of theft," she said, unfolding the first pages for the crowd to see. "I accuse him of an embezzlement scheme that has drained the Ashford fortune of millions across nearly a decade, falsified shipments, doubled tenant rents, payments to suppliers who exist nowhere but in his own hand." Vance's composure finally cracked entirely. "Lies," he snapped, "fabrications from a desperate." "The handwriting is yours, sir," Novaly said, holding the pages higher, steady despite the trembling she refused to let reach her voice. "I imagine any solicitor in this room could confirm it within the hour." She turned next to her uncle, whose smooth confidence had begun, at last, to falter. "And you," she said, "appear on this same list of settlement, dated 3 years past, matching precisely the collapse of my late father's shipping fleet. The very fleet Mr. Vance's syndicate destroyed, and the very fortune you have spent a year hunting me to claim." Her voice hardened. "You did not come here as my concerned guardian. You came as his partner." The ballroom erupted into chaos gasps, furious whispers, the assembled nobility of the entire county suddenly recalculating every assumption they'd carried into the room that evening. Several names from Novaly's list stood among the very guests present, their faces going pale as they recognized their own ruin documented in her hands. Dominic stepped to her side then, tall and furious and utterly resolute, addressing the crowd with the full weight of his title. "I have reviewed these accounts myself, alongside independent solicitors," he said, voice carrying easily across the stunned silence. "Every claim, my heir." He paused, and something warm broke briefly through his fury as he looked at Novaly. "Every claim this woman has made is verified beyond dispute. Mr. Vance, you are dismissed from this household, effective immediately, and these documents will be delivered to the magistrate before dawn." Vance's mask shattered entirely, fury and panic twisting his composed features into something ugly and desperate. "You have no idea," he hissed, "what you've unraveled. This reaches further than one house, further than one girl's fortune."
"Then it will all be exposed," Dominic said coldly, "every thread of it, starting tonight."
Her uncle, seeing the tide turn entirely against him, attempted to slip toward the ballroom doors, only to find them already blocked by constables Dominic had quietly summoned days before, anticipating precisely this outcome. "Arrest them both," Dominic said, "on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. And see that every family named in these pages is informed of exactly what was done to them." As Vance was led away in furious, sputtering disgrace, and her uncle followed in stunned silence, finally stripped of the charm that had protected him for so many years, Novaly stood in the centre of the ballroom, no longer hiding, no longer invisible, but seen entirely, by everyone who mattered, exactly as she truly was. In the days that followed, the full scope of Vance's syndicate unravelled exactly as Novaly had feared and hoped in equal measure. Solicitors descended on Ashford's accounts, magistrates summoned witnesses from 3 counties, and family after family named in that hidden ledger came forward with their own accounts of falsified debts and quiet ruin, finally understanding they had not been victims of misfortune, but of a deliberate, patient theft. Vance's trial was swift and thorough, his carefully built empire of fear collapsing the moment the staff he had terrorized for years found their courage and testified, one after another, to everything they had witnessed. Effie spoke first, then Mrs. Pruitt, then the footman who had once been too frightened even to meet Novaly's eyes in a corridor, a household united, at last, in the telling of a truth too long suppressed. Her uncle's fate proved no kinder. stripped of his false guardianship, exposed as Vance's partner in the very syndicate that had destroyed her father's fleet. He faced charges that would ensure he never again held power over her, or over anyone else's inheritance, for the rest of his days. A week later, in the quiet aftermath of the scandal finally settling into ordinary calm, Dominic found Novalie in the kitchen garden, gathering the last of the autumn herbs before the first true frost arrived. "The debts are nullified," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Every family that suffered under Vance's false accounts will see their fortunes restored, so far as restoration is possible. And your father's fleet, what remains of it, is legally, entirely yours again. No uncle. No guardianship. No one is standing between you and what is rightfully your own." Novalie straightened, brushing soil from her hands, and felt something long held and tightly wound finally begin to loosen in her chest. "Free," she said softly, testing the word like something unfamiliar. "I had nearly forgotten what that felt like."
Then allow me, Dominic said, to help you remember it properly.
He knelt then, in the frost-touched garden, taking her soil-marked hand in both of his with a reverence that had nothing to do with rank or fortune and everything to do with the woman who had walked into his house as a stranger and remade it, quietly, into something worth saving. "I do not ask you this as a duke offering charity to a servant," he said, voice steady despite the emotion plain beneath it, "nor as a man who has only just discovered your fortune restored. I ask you as someone who watched you organize chaos into order with nothing but patience and stubborn grace. Who watched an entire household learn courage because you first showed them what it looked like. Who fell in love with you long before I understood the full truth of who you were, and who wants nothing more now than to build the rest of his life beside you." He looked up at her, everything he felt plain and unguarded on his face. "Novalie, will you marry me? Not as a servant elevated beyond her station, not as an heiress rescued from ruin, but simply as the woman I love, and the only mistress I could ever imagine for this house." Novalie looked down at him, this man who had once called her too gentle for his house, now kneeling in the frost with his heart entirely open in his hands, and felt every hard month of running and hiding and fighting finally settle into something that felt, for the first time in a year, like home. "Yes," she said, and the word came out steady, certain, glowing with everything she had fought so hard to reclaim. "Yes, Dominic. 1,000 times yes." He rose and kissed her then, in the quiet frost-silvered garden, while somewhere beyond the walls the household that had once trembled at Vance's footsteps now moved freely through halls, finally, truly their own, a house no longer built on fear, but on the quiet, unshakable loyalty of people who had learned, together, exactly what true strength looked like. By the time the first snow fell over Ashford Estate that winter, the servants no longer whispered of the Duke's cold heart or the fragile girl who had arrived on foot in the rain. They spoke instead of their future Duchess, the woman who had organized their kitchens, defended their dignity, exposed their tormentor, and taught an entire household that gentleness and strength had never once been opposites at all. She had come to Ashford to disappear.
She stayed to become the very heart of it.
If you were Novalie standing in that ballroom with every eye in the county watching, would you have gambled everything on the truth the way she did, or would fear have won that night instead?
Tell me in the comments, because I want to know how far you think real courage is willing to go when the whole world is watching you fail.
And if Novala's story kept you holding your breath from that first storm-soaked arrival to the very last snowfall,
there's another duke, another secret, and another woman about to walk into a house that isn't ready for her, waiting for you right here on the Royal Duke Diaries. Subscribe, and let's find out together what she's hiding.